I would request Mr. M.J. Akbar to please come on stage for his keynote address. Mr. M.J. Akbar will be deliberating on India's arc of neighborhood, dimensions of PM Modi's foreign policy. M.J. Akbar has served as the Minister of State for External Affairs. He was a Member of Parliament in the Rajya Sabha. During his long career of journalism, he launched as editor India's first weekly political news periodicals, including India Today, Headlines Today, The Telegraph, The Asian Age, and Deccan Chronicle, among others.
And thank you very much, Abhinav, and thank you very much, Maharaja here. I'm very, very pleased. I don't know if the word impressed sounds a bit awkward, but it's truly a very good beginning. Thank you. The subject with which we open our discussions today is the arc of neighborhood. It has always been my, I find in all speeches the word humble is used before this side, but it has always been my humble belief that the best way to begin to understand a subject is by using a dictionary. Right? And therefore, the best way to begin to understand what is a neighbor is to check the dictionary. And this is the Hobson-Jobson approach to strategy and geopolitics, but very useful. One of the most familiar idioms, if you might say, of understanding the neighborhood, any neighborhood, is one that is also articulated almost by every Prime Minister before our present Prime Minister. And that was that you can change everything, but you can't change your neighbors. It seems, as I said, an idiomatic fact, a fact of geography. This has also been the fundamental basis of our approach to our most troublesome and indeed now troubled neighbor, Pakistan. The well-meaning among our leaders have often been perplexed by Pakistan's inability to cooperate. Just now it was said, I think by Anil, that the Indian Army has not, no, I think you said this, that the Indian Army, or we, have never been aggressors. It's absolutely true, even in 47, since 47. We have never actually started a war against anyone. We have convincingly taught some of our neighbors that it's not a good idea to start a war against us. That's quite a different issue. I'm very happy, and I say this as often as I can, that when we in India say that we have a defense ministry, we mean it. We don't have an offense ministry. On the other hand, we understand the meaning of defense. The meaning of defense is not an inch of Indian land shall be lost. And if there is an attack of India, even through terrorism, particularly now through terrorism, there shall be accountability. And these, I think, are the twin pillars on which substantially, our defense strategy rests. Prime Minister Modi in 2014 began his prime ministership on the day he was sworn in by an extraordinarily important message to our neighbors. It was really his first gesture of policy, because he invited all the SAARC members, heads of government, to his swearing-in ceremony. Right? What could be more? It had not been done before. Nobody thought of doing it before. But this gesture was an outreach. It was reaching out to all nations, and indeed to one nation in particular. It took him 2 years, around that time, to realize that at least in one case, the gesture had been futile. And when he realized that, he took a decision which I am afraid has still not yet entered the discourse to the extent that it should have. I'm sure there's appreciation of it in the minds that have run a foreign policy. They are all sitting here. But it has not yet become part of what I would call public knowledge. Prime Minister Modi changed the meaning of neighbor. He could not change geography, but he could change the meaning of neighbor. He redefined neighborhood from a definition of distance to a definition of reach. If I cannot reach you, you are not my neighbor. You are an accident of geography, but you are not my neighbor. I'll give you a very simple example by which you will understand this more. Today, we have, I would imagine, somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure if not here then on social media, that there must be about 1,000 flights to and from Gulf every week. My friend, the former ambassador of Turkey to India is here. How many flights are from here to Turkey and back? Full. There is not a single flight from here to Pakistan. If I can't reach you, I can reach the Gulf. And therefore, my neighbor is the Gulf. It has nothing to do with religion. The Gulf is as Muslim and Turkey is as Muslim as anyone else. Today, there are 10 flights a day to Bangladesh. They are a Muslim country. We have been trapped into believing that the India-Pakistan relationship is about religion. It is not about religion. All the new neighborhood, today we have created an arc of neighborhood from the Gulf to Indonesia. It is not yet a part of the public knowledge or public discourse. To the extent to which under Prime Minister Modi, Andamans is being developed as a maritime infrastructure. At this moment, and this is happening through a building relationship with Indonesia. So, this neighborhood of ours is a very thriving relationship, bar one. And this bar one is also owes to a certain bend in the river of history, and which was in the end of the Second World War and that with the creation of artificial rivers. What is the creation of art? The creation of artificial rivers through the practice or through the imposition of partitions. We were not alone. Wherever the British went, they did this. And wherever the Americans followed, they found it convenient too. This is colonialism. It was partition of India, partition of West Asia. If Kemal Atatürk had not been there, how many parts of Turkey be in today? Not only during the war, after the war. Vietnam was partitioned separately, Korea was partitioned, there was partitions everywhere. So this was the creation of artificial limits. And we were also left with an artificial. So if religion is not the basis of the problems between India and Pakistan, what is? The real difference between India and Pakistan is not religion, it is a difference called modernity. India is a modern nation state. Pakistan is a medieval state, which sometimes tries to become a nation, but is still unsure whether it is run as a nation or as a country. India's modernity actually owes a great deal, and this may surprise you because we think of modernity as a form of dress. Right? If you wear certain forms of dress, you're modern. If you wear other forms of dress, you're not considered psychologically modern. Gandhiji wore a dhoti like most of Indians. But in our mindset, he's not seen as modern. He was the most modern Indian of the 20th century because the principle of modernity was set in the 1931 1931 Kanpur Congress. Incidentally, I must also suggest one thing or mention one thing. What was Gandhiji's greatest contribution to India? His greatest contribution to India was not the liberation of India from the British. He did that, yes, but that was not the real contribution. The real contribution of Gandhiji was in 1920 when he liberated Indians from fear. The moment he liberated us from fear of the British, conventional wisdom in 1919-1920 said, ये कौन धोती से पहन के आया हुआ है, ये अंग्रेज तो 300 साल रहेंगे. The most influential Indians believed that. The moment he liberated us from fear, the British rule could not last even 30 years. Because he understood the British had ruled us not because they were strong, but because we were weak. The moment he ended India's weakness, what are the British? Just a handful of people trying very hard to live on the cudgels of Indian partners. I would use a worse term, but I won't. It's easy to use the word modernity, but what is modernity? There are 4 principles in modernity. First, democracy. You can't be a modern nation without democracy. And democracy, by the way, is not the right merely to change it. It may change governments once in 5 years. Democracy is the right to speak freely every day. In my more tendentious movements, I would call democracy the right to speak nonsense. Everybody allows you to speak sense. The democracy is inherently the right also to speak your mind, even if your mind is a little awry. And we have examples of everything in our democracy, but it will be in election time when everybody speaks. Freedom of conscience, freedom of belief, freedom of speech, freedom of movement. Second basic principle is freedom of faith. It's extremely important, and the equality of it. Every human being is an equal. The right to religion is an equal. If you want to understand my country, yes, you can go to Delhi, you can go to Udaipur, you can go to Calcutta, you can go where you like, but I suggest to all of you that you go to one place when you go to Delhi, and that is not the Parliament of India. You go to a place called Chandni Chowk and go there by 4 in the morning. At 4 in the morning, every day of my country begins with the azan that you can hear in Chandni Chowk. And a little after that, you will hear the bells of the Hanuman temple. And a little bit after that, you will hear the part of Guru Granth Sahib. Just there, just stand there, you don't have to go anywhere. And a little after that, you will hear the bells of St. Stephen's Church. Nobody did it deliberately. It was sui generis, it emerged out of the heart and soul of India. That is the meaning of freedom of faith. And freedom of faith, by the way, includes the right to be atheist. By these 2 criteria, China may be a successful country, but it is not a modern nation. Third, non-negotiable principle of modernity is gender equality. You can't anymore live in the past, where this was a privilege of the elite. Gender equality is inherent to any progress. You can't progress without it. And fourth, of course, elimination of poverty. Our constitution uses the phrase alleviation of poverty. Alleviation of poverty is no longer. If today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi seems to be, and is probably likely to be re-elected, the biggest reason is because he has changed the alleviation of poverty into elimination. Don't look at the last 75 years from the perspective of this room. हाँ 75 साल पहले इतना खराब था, आज देखो. The poor are asking. For 75 years it took you to give us food. It's going to take you another 75 years to give us shelter. They won't wait. And that is why his programs, long before, Vishwamitra, or it is our world which is being served. The argument of Pakistan that it is based on Islam is one of the false arguments. I am particularly reminded of saying this here because one of his ancestors, Rana Raj Singh, according to James Spencer, who recorded it, sent a letter to Aurangzeb after the imposition of jizya, in which he reminded, and Shivaji had sent a similar letter, in which he reminded Aurangzeb not only of the fact that jizya had been abolished by his great-grandfather, grandfather and father, never imposed, but reminded them of a creed, the basic principle of Islam. He said, how does Allah describe himself in the Quran? Allah is called Rabbul Alameen. That means the Rabb, the God of the whole universe. He's never called Rabbul Muslimin. That is only God of Muslims. He created Tajinder ji as much as he created me. So why don't we behave as children of his creation and leave matters of faith to him when any day of judgment comes? When talking of history, I am reminded of the famous What is History is one of his great books. Thin one, very useful to anyone who is interested in the subject. E.H. Carr, the British historian. And he said, facts are like fish. A history book depends on which part of the ocean you're fishing from. So, yes, but facts are like fish. This also brings me to another element of the writing of history. It's called what if history. What if this had happened and that happened? It's a genre by itself. So I have often thought, what if Pakistan had not been formed? And actually, we have an answer. We have an answer to that question, but we don't see it. Pakistan was formed in two wings in 1947. But the answer as to what if Pakistan had not been formed based on the views of Islam is present, because in 1971, one half of Pakistan liberated itself, not only geographically, liberated itself from the idea of Pakistan. And Bangladesh reinvented itself on a much stronger basis, which is cultural nationalism. Culture has been the basis of modern state, almost everywhere. That is why Europe has so many states. And by the way, if Islam had been the basis, sufficient as a basis for nationalism, why would there be 22 Arab nations? Nowhere in history Has it really been the basis? And even if you extend the idea of caliphate, you must remember there was no single caliphate at any time, apart from the first four, which we say with the righteous caliphs. After that, it all split. And that is why you can see the difference in the trajectory of our relationship with Pakistan and in the relationship with Bangladesh. That is a model lesson of how the subcontinent and our neighborhood would have progressed. India and Bangladesh, I can't think really of another, perhaps the only two countries which have resolved their border disputes peacefully. It has been so peaceful that nobody remembers it. And it was one of the triumphs of his first term. When things happen peacefully, human beings neglect. Among our other neighbors, the Himalaya is perhaps too cold for warmth. So the best we can expect with China is the occasional thaw. China, as you know, is a very singular nation. It has border problems with all its neighbors. Not a single neighbor. Those of you who have served in Vietnam will pay me out. Those of you who have served in Central Asia will know exactly that its so-called map of shame, the pink map, extends beyond the boundaries. It has, as it says, what it calls rights over Nepal. And so on. There is very little that China doesn't own in its imagination. We, on the other hand, have really, as they say, the term bent over backwards. In 1950s, Jawaharlal Nehru, in order to appease China, twice refused an offer to become a member of the Security Council. Tirumuti, you might have represented us in a much higher capacity. If we had pursued that line, it was genuinely an offer to us. I'm trying very hard to actually meet your time limit requirements. I'm doing my best, but I will end on two more points. Then I discussed the new neighborhood of India, which is from Gulf to Indonesia. And since we have also spoken of the Shastras and our ancient understanding and our ancient wisdom being a major contributor in our thought process to how we can create policy which is relevant to our contemporary requirements. It is often forgotten that in our Shastras, India is seen not only as the land south of the Himalaya, it is also seen as the land north of the waters. And when you see India as a land north of the waters, then you will recognize Preeti's contribution when she was in the ministry, and I see this very seriously, and the conference that you organized, helped organize. And indeed, the policy, the fairly innovative new policy terms that have now shaped are very, very, I think, radically new foreign policy. Today, India has become a net security provider from the Red Sea to the Malacca Straits. And then beyond the Malacca Straits, in partnership with the port, it is part of the renamed Indo-Pacific. This renaming of the Pacific was not an accident and was not easy and was not given as a gift. The age of gifts doesn't exist and never has existed. It was correcting the wrong naming of the world by the West. It was the Indo-Pacific and is the Indo-Pacific. And these waters flows into each other. India is today with 3 aircraft carriers. One has joined United States, Russia, China and France as the owner of 3 aircraft carriers. I didn't mention Britain deliberately because 2 of its 3 are in hospital permanently. If you want to understand our foreign policy now, I would urge you just to think along these lines. One of the most important doctrines that still pervade Western foreign policy lines across is the balance of power. I don't have to explain to this audience what it means. India's foreign policy now is not based on the balance of power, but on the power of balance. And that enables us to actually become a bridge between binaries. And those of you in this audience will understand without me enumerating what precisely. So when we today go to talk to Benjamin Netanyahu, as we have done very recently, it is in an effort to be an influential force. If today Prime Minister Modi is invited by both the President of Russia and by Ukraine's President to visit him, it is because we represent this power of balance. But now that I've mentioned Ukraine, I will end on one fear. Since we are in the midst or at the height, or perhaps at the ebb of the Ukraine war, I hope it's the ebb, because the Ukraine war is seen as a war in Europe. Much more than being in a war in Europe, it is a war that could make Asia the battlefield. Ukraine war is about Crimea. How far is Crimea from Northern Caucasus? Stop. Delhi and Gurgaon. How far is Northern Caucasus from Southern Caucasus? How far is Southern Caucasus from Syria? How far is Syria from Israel? Right? About as far away as from me and the whistle. How far is Israel from Red Sea? And which navy there is in the Red Sea? So neighborhoods can also become areas of conflagration if we are not careful. Thank you very much.